In this lesson, we're going to build the seat to our ship. Alright, so let's get in here and let's go ahead and create the seat to our ship. And what we're going to do is we're going to borrow some geometry from the ship itself to get the base shape of our seat. So let's go ahead and select the ship, and I'm going to go into my surface options. And what I want to do is I want to create the geometry for our seat from the ship polygons itself. But you'll notice that if I go to line, I don't have any access to any polygons whatsoever. So what I can do is I can add an edit poly modifier and be able to access those. Now you'll see here that we've got all kinds of geometry and a lot of polygons to try and deal with here, and that could be a little bit of trouble. Now the reason that we have so much topology and so many polygons is because of our surface modifier. So let's go to the surface modifier, and you'll see that we have this patch topology parameter here. And we need to remember that anytime that we add parameters to something, that all the parameters above are going to be dependent on the ones below. So if we have our surface and the patch topologies are set to something like 4, it's going to get a little bit smoother, and it's going to have more and more topology and more geometry. So if we knock this down, you'll notice that we get 0 smoothing on this whenever we set our steps down to 0. And this is what we're looking for. So let's go to Edit Poly. Let's go into Polygon mode and select these 3 polygons right here. And I'm going to go grab my Move tool, and I'm going to hold Shift and drag this out in the X. Now you'll see here that we get this Clone Part of Mesh dialog box, and we have the option to clone to element or clone to object. If you want to clone to element, that means that that object that you've just cloned is going to be part of this ship. But I want to make it its own separate object, so I'm going to clone to its object and just rename it to seat. Once you hit enter on that, you'll notice that we're still in polygon mode of the ship, so we'll turn that off, and then we'll select the seat itself. Okay, and you can see that name there. Let's go ahead and move this back in the X, and we'll go ahead and just leave it right where it's at. Okay, it's pretty much right on top there. And I'm going to use a modifier that's going to give me some thickness on this object. So I'm going to use the modifier called shell. Now you might have been thinking, well, we could use extrude, and that is true, but we're going to go ahead and just use shell in this case. Just another way of doing it. So here we can see that we have our shell modifier. We've got some default settings set up here, and I've got this inner amount. I'm going to set that to 0 because that's going to take the back side of that seat and make it flush with the cockpit here. And then I'm going to take my outer amount up, and I'm going to do something like, let's go ahead and do 3. Okay, give us a good thickness on that. Now we are going to smooth this out. Now before we can do anything, we need to be able to access the polygons of this entire object and not just the flat surface. Okay, so what I can do is I can convert this to an editable poly again and collapse the shell into the editable poly, or I can add an edit poly modifier and work that way. Now I know that I am done with the thickness here, so I don't need to be able to access the shell any longer. I've completed the goal with that. So I'm going to just go ahead and collapse that or convert it to an editable poly. Okay, so now that we have that, we can access polygon mode, and we can begin to shape this as we need to. I'm going to go to my front view, and I'm going to hit F3, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with vertex mode, and I'm just going to shape this up a little bit. Let's go ahead and constrain the edges, or the vertices to their edges, and drag this back in the X. Okay, see how it follows along with that topology? And then I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to round out this seat. So I'm just going to pull this up here just a little bit. Okay, so something kind of like this. We're going to leave this just where it's at for right now, and I might pull this back some. Okay, just kind of give it a nice little slope there. Alright, so now let's start to really shape this up. Let's get the shape that we're looking for out of our seat. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the polygons along the center, because we're going to use a modifier later on to get the other side. So that way we only have to model this portion. Now I see these vertices right here. Okay, I'm going to select those, and I'm just going to push those in a little bit away from that wall. Okay, that looks good. And you know what, I'm going to take this and I'm going to push that in a little bit and bring this a little bit closer in, just to kind of give it a round top there. So something kind of like that. And that looks good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and smooth this out by adding a turbo smooth. And I'm going to take my iterations up to 2, isoline display just for cleanliness. And then we need to kind of get our volume back a little bit. So let's go to edge mode, make sure we show end results. And I'm going to use the Swift Loop tool to kind of help me out with this. So I don't want the edges to be real hard, but I want that volume to come back a little bit. So I'm going to create an edge that's not real close to this side, but maybe a little less than halfway. So that way it still brings that volume back, but still making it very, very smooth. Let's do the same thing across the top here. Let's just kind of square that off a little bit. And then looking at this, I want to also do the same thing right here. Okay. And let's create 2 very hard creases right in here. Okay, and that's just going to make that seat very rigid right there where the cushions are going to come together. Alright, so now I'm going to turn off edge mode, and I'm also going to turn off turbo smooth for right now. I want to create a specific design in the cushions itself. I want to create some raised edges and things like that to make it look a little more interesting than just a very flat, smooth seat like this. Okay, so I'm going to go to polygon mode, and we're going to take a look at, well actually let's go to edge mode. We're going to take a look at making some segments in here that are going to help us out with this. So I'm going to turn off turbo smooth, and I'm going to go to edge mode, turn off that Swift Loop by right clicking in your scene. Let's select this edge, hold shift and select the ring by selecting the next edge, and we're going to use connect settings, and we can split this right in the middle here, but I'm looking at this and I think I want to go ahead and split it into 2 segments. And that looks pretty good to me. Alright, I'm going to hit OK on that, and I'm going to go to edge mode, or I'm sorry, polygon mode, and we're going to select this polygon and this one, and we're going to extrude this out. And actually let's try to think about this. Do I want to inset? Well, we'll do extrude, but I'm going to do what's called a bevel instead. So if we use the bevel settings, it gives us the same result as extrude, but it also bevels the extrusion, so that way it kind of brings it in a little bit. Let's take our height down, and while we're here, let's go ahead and turn on turbo smooth just to see what that looks like here. So we'll go ahead and bring that down. Let's take our outline amount up a little bit, so let's go to negative 0.25, and let's go ahead and drop this down. Now, if I hit OK on this, I see a little bit of an issue. I'm going to have this kind of bumped area right here, and it's going to be symmetried over. So I'm going to have this bump and then this bump right here, and that's not really what I want. I want like a solid cushion that goes all the way through the seat and not necessarily split down the middle like that. So I have to do something here. Let's go ahead and hit Control Z to get rid of that bevel, and let's go to edge mode really quickly, and let's select one of the edges right here along the center. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the symmetry modifier. Okay, now you'll notice that it applies symmetry along the x-axis here, and it gives us an unexpected result. So what we need to do is we need to switch the axis in which this is going to symmetry. So let's go to Y, and you'll see again that's still not quite right. So let's go to Z, and you'll see that this disappears completely. So what is happening here? Well, the symmetry modifier is going to apply symmetry along the axis that it's being used. And you can see that the axis is right here, and that's not quite right. So what we need to do is we need to expand symmetry, grab this mirror, and then we're going to move this over in the Y direction. You'll see that seat coming back. So we just need to position that correctly so that way it will symmetry properly. Okay, and you'll notice that the vertices along the center are going to weld together because we have weld seam checked. Alright, everything is looking good. Now the threshold is set to 0.1, so this is making sure that it's going to weld pretty much when those vertices are pretty close to being right on top of one another. Alright, so now that we have that symmetry, let's go ahead and turn that off. Let's minimize that symmetry. And I'm going to go into Turbo Smooth really quickly. And let's go ahead and just delete that off. And let's collapse this symmetry. So we're going to convert this to Editable Poly. And then I'm going to apply symmetry, or Turbo Smooth again. So 2 iterations, isoline display. Alright, so now we should be able to work freely with extruding and things like that. So now let's come in here and let's go ahead and grab this row right here along the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and use bevel here. Let's pull that down and take our outside amount up, and we're going to go to, I think negative 0.2 is pretty good. Let's take the extrusion amount down a little bit. I don't want it to be real rough or anything like that. Okay, so that looks good. Let's just go to 1. Okay, let's grab these edges. Let's do that same thing. So bevel, and it should keep our settings. Look how that creates that nice crease in between the cushions. So that looks good. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to create another one right here. Now I want this one to be a little bit bigger. So I'm really not all that happy with the amount of segments that I have, so I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to take these segments right here. So I'm double clicking on that edge and grabbing that entire loop, and I'm going to constrain those edges to the edge, so that way I can drag those straight up in the Y. Do something like that, and then I'll go to polygon mode by hitting 4 on the keyboard. So let's select just those 4, and we're going to bevel this. Okay, that looks good. And we'll hit OK on that. And then I'm going to grab all of these, and we'll bevel that, and actually bevel, not extrude. And that gives us kind of the headrest for this seat. And I'm going to bevel that in just a little bit more. So we'll do -1 on that, and then hit OK. Just taking a look at what we've created so far, so pretty happy with the way that looks. I might change the shape up of this a little bit more. We might go into vertex mode, and we'll kind of squeeze that in just a little bit. So I'm going to grab my scale tool with all those selected. Just kind of scale that in a little bit, and then we'll take this whole thing. Let's go ahead and center our pivot point. Pivot point, center to object, and let's just scale that in some. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Final thing that I want to do is I want to create a little bit of an indentation in the seat itself. So let's go to Edit, Poly, and we're going to go to Vertex mode. I'm going to select these vertices right here and move those straight up. Let's make sure that that's not constrained. So hit Control Z to undo that. Lift that up, gives us a little bit of a raised look to our seat. And then I'm going to take the polygons, so hit 4 on the keyboard to select these polygons right here. And I'm going to bevel those, but I'm going to take this in a negative direction. And then take the bevel amount up just a little bit to like 0.2. And we'll go to -0.5 on that, just to create a little bit of an indentation for the seat itself. Okay, so that turned out Nice and smooth, nice and neat there. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with the look of that seat there. Alright, so in our next lesson, we're going to go ahead and continue with creating the objects we need in the cockpit itself. So we're going to create kind of the console, if you will. Alright, so I'll see you then.